Hello, man of the hour.
The rumors of my cowardice were greatly exaggerated.
And the rumors of my death were also greatly exaggerated. Or I suppose in this case, AMC's death. So let's kick it off. Are you presenting the bull case for uranium?
I suppose that'll be my purpose. I don't know exactly how you want to run this, so you're the boss.
Well, I was hoping to have a couple more people interested in uranium. Let's bring up a couple of the people with hands up. Are you guys here to talk uranium, or you just want to listen in, but from the speaker stage?
I'd like to talk uranium too.
All right. Just a quick question. Wait, what? Why is this title the baddest of bad taste? What's wrong with a little bit of cage match? All right, or not? All right. Let's kick it off then. Reptile, give us your overview of uranium.
All right, I could do this for like 20 hours, but I'll try to keep life short and simple for the sake of sanity. So the long story short is, as an investment, I happen to like the sector for a very simple reason. It accounts for 18% of the United States' current electrical generation, which is a very large chunk, and cannot easily be replaced in a short period of time. On top of that, the physical product itself sells today for $50 a pound at open market. However, it costs a mine on average somewhere between $65 to $70 per pound to pull it out of the ground. That is to say, a uranium mining company today is guaranteed to lose $15 per pound selling their product into the market. For this reason, they simply don't. This has led to a current 33% supply deficiency per year over the last 5 years in uranium production. So you have a very basic market setup. Sorry, I'm going to try to keep this really quick. You have a very basic market setup. It's too darn cheap to produce, it's at a deficit, and it's incredibly important from an electrical standpoint. So when you have a market setup like that, one of two things happens. Either A, the market dissolves and the product goes away, or B, the price meets the incentive price. So you're essentially betting with yourself, what do you think is more likely? Uranium to hit $65 and get mines mining it, or the US to permit 18% of its electrical generation to fizzle out in the next 5 years? And that's kind of the short and sweet of why I happen to like the sector.
So
I think
let me
traditionally there's government subsidies that come in, right, to help with this gap.
There are currently no government subsidies for this type
Whoa.
of gap right now.
Wow.
So the gap exists because of Fukushima. So again, I'll try to keep this like super short and simple. In 2011, we all know Fukushima happened, ba-boom. So there was a ton of uranium sitting in Japan. Japan at the time accounted for 11% of the world's nuclear generation. All right. So they shut down all their power plants. In general, a power plant will carry between 2 to 3 years worth of fuel in different forms on hand, because that's about how long it takes to turn uranium from in the ground into a usable fuel, about a 2-year cycle. So they'll carry about 2 years worth, plus they'll usually have about 10 years worth of contracting of a deliverable amount given every month out for a year. All right, so essentially, the Japanese market was all told, hey, guess what? Your power plants are shut down. We had a disaster, but they're still contracted into selling the stuff. They have a bunch sitting on them. So it created this very strange secondary market where traders could come in, turn to Japan and say, hey, we know you're buying this for $50 a pound. We know you're stuck with it. We're going to give you $20 a pound just to get it off your hands. And then they sat on it and they paid the storage fees. And then they turned to utilities and said, hey, you guys normally have to sign these 10-year deals that you get stuck into. You don't like those. We're just some dude. I don't have to run a mine. I don't have overhead. You just buy it from me, call me up when you need it, and I'll deliver it at whatever price we can agree on. And so it changed what was a very long-term set market into a now on-demand. Utilities could get what they wanted at incredibly low pricing.
So are you saying that 18% of the US market, which is using uranium, is doing it all from reserves?
It's not all from reserves because, again, these are 10 years long contracts. So some of this are companies that still have some contracts they're delivering into. But most utilities right now have moved to a much more traditional on-demand supply setup, where rather than saying we're going to secure our supply for 10 years, they're saying we don't have to worry because if we need uranium for a year, I can go into the open spot market and I can put out a contract that says I need 1 million pounds this year by the end of the year, and here's the price I'm willing to pay. And for the longest time, over that decade period, someone would come in and say, yeah, I've got you covered. I can do that. And mines wouldn't fill that for just a 1 year period, but those traders who were able to move in were happy to fill that.
And so, who are the players? You mentioned Fukushima and their fallout, but fallout might be a nasty word to use there. But what are the other players or companies in the industry that we should be looking at?
Wasn't Fukushima the city where the flood happened and it caused the nuclear meltdown thingy?
Right. Yeah. So I'll try to answer both. Fukushima was the city where the power plant melted down, which caused all of Japan to shut off their power plants, and then many other countries followed suit. As far as, hang on one second.
Oh,
Pins and needles.
the suspense is killing us, but
I'm sorry.
it's just rearranging his uranium.
I wanted to make life very dramatic. It's what I do.
Commercial break.
So as far as who the players are, for me personally, I look at the miners, the people who produce the physical product. It's not the only way to play it. It's just where my focus has been, as the companies who pull it out of the ground. The reason I happen to like that particular sector is it's an incredibly small sector. If you took every current uranium mining company and gathered them up into the ultra super mega uranium corporation, it would have a market cap less than that of Hershey chocolate, the entirety of it. And even more so, if you were to take every uranium mining company and say, which one of these have actually produced uranium before, I can count on two hands all current existing companies that have ever pulled a pound of uranium out of the ground that are publicly traded. It's an incredibly small sector because it's gone through a decade of all these new players coming in, selling at low levels, selling at the moment, and not in these long-term contracts. And many of them have had to shut down, and many of them have not reopened because of it.
Right on. So just for context, Hershey's is a $50 billion company, and you're saying that all uranium, this is publicly traded uranium companies, account for less than that.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, definitely sounds like an industry either dying or about to go catalytic, based on some of these dynamics, especially without the government in there to help subsidize and sort of prop up some smaller players.
It doesn't really sound like the government has so much to do here, as much as it is that there's this weird market dynamic where the market's flooded with this low cost commodity that's artificially low priced. But that's going to end soon.
Yeah. So when you look at this market, one of the strange things about it, because it's uranium, it's a nuclear product, there's a national security risk. So as far as how much is out there is a very hard question to answer. You can even if you said to me how much, if you pick a local nuclear power plant and said how much uranium are they sitting on, I can't tell you. The U.S. Department of Energy knows, but that is not publicly available information. So it's a little bit hard to find, but you can look at other signals. One of the signals is that the spot market currently has shown a significant increase in price. It's gone from around $20 last year, $30 last year, into the 50s, which at least suggests that if there's not a dwindling amount of available supply, traders are feeling they're able to ask for a higher price, and those super cheap pounds aren't easily available. But the other big signal has been Japan, with their most recent election, has elected a new prime minister who has said his main priority is a full restart of the Japanese nuclear fleet. They're already set to have 9 new reactors online, and they're planning on pulling more on. Fukushima will not be restarting, but others will. So you're taking a nation that was selling out of their uranium and now essentially signaling to them, hey, if you still have some, hold on to it because we might put your plant back online.
And is this a reaction to what's going on in Europe, or just a desire for more, self-reliance on energy?
So for Japan, it's because Japan is a small island nation, and it's hard for a country the size of Japan to meet its energy needs through like natural gas. If you want to, you can store years worth of nuclear fuel rods in a small warehouse, right? So if you're a small island nation, it's far more feasible to run it that way than it is to have all this natural gas that you have to store. For a place like the US, you have the space, you can do that. For Japan, not so much. The other side of it is recently, within the last couple of years, it's been moved into the category of kind of like green energy, and that's going to make people like frustrated. I get that, and you can feel whatever way you want to, but it gets this view of it doesn't really produce carbon. If you actually take the 40-year run span of a nuclear power plant, it produces as much carbon in that 40-year cycle as 1 hour of running a coal-based plant, as an example. So it's kind of gotten this carbon neutral tag to it. So nations are kind of in this awkward spot of like, well, we like wind and solar, there's nothing wrong with them, we'll use it, but we also need a consistent energy source that we can directly control. I'm not dependent on how much wind is blowing, I'm not dependent on how much sunlight is coming in. I can just turn to a power plant and say, produce this many kilowatts per hour and do it now, right? So that's kind of where it's found itself.
I think that's what Chamath was advocating. He was on, I think, a Lex Friedman podcast talking about this at length, because he's one of his big winners in SPACs has been MP Materials, and so he has some interest in like the renewable input sources. And he was saying, yeah, this is sort of like a normalizing function to the up and down that is, renewables generally. So all of that makes sense. I think I remember him saying something, but maybe you're closer to the space, but so did the CCP out of their whatever Congress election thing, where they're starting to announce some of their big initiatives, have they said anything about their intentions around nuclear? Because that's obviously like orders of magnitude, change potential in terms of size of demand, I would guess. Do you know what their stance is? Have they said anything there?
So China's made a commitment to, and again, you can believe China however you want to. Their commitment right now is they intend to build 150 new reactors over the next decade. So about 15 reactors a year, give or take, is what they're planning on do. They've been buying a lot of uranium out in the market. They have a very large uranium company called China General Nuclear, which will hit the market cap, but you can only trade it on the Shanghai Stock Exchange. So if you can get access to it and you want to, I guess go for it. But they're doing a lot of buying up uranium. They're focused much more in Northern Africa is where they're trying to get their mines going. But yeah, there is a big commitment for China kind of playing into that idea of they need the electricity. They want to push towards the nuclear route within their green movement.
Yeah. So I kind of want to chime in as being a skeptic of uranium, really supplying world's energy. And I kind of would hope you could speak on the actual reactors they're planning on building further, because just based on my studies, I understand that nuclear power stations have to be decommissioned after a certain time. It's not just a regular brick and mortar, you know what I mean? So they're getting decommissioned, I believe, around 40, 50 years. So can you kind of speak further on that? Because that right away kind of made me a skeptic of this alternative energy.
Sure. So I'll open with, again, I'm fine with the investment because, like I said, today it's 18% of the U.S. electrical generation. Decommission's not going to replace that. Building of wind and solar is not going to replace that in such a short time. But as far as are there decommissions, there are. And it kind of depends on the nation, right? Like Germany, big push towards decommissioning. After Fukushima, France said they were going to decommission. They saw what was going on in Germany. They changed their mind. The U.S. had been getting less pro-nuclear. Recently, there's been a change. I'm not going to remember specific power plants' names, but let's see if the best I could do. Diablo Canyon in California just got approved for a 20-year extension. That's the last reactor in California. They were going to shut it down. Biden administration essentially came out and said, hey, we're putting this money towards keeping your power plants. We'll give you 20 years extensions for the ones that should be shut down to make the upgrades. Just apply for it. They literally rewrote the grant to permit California in so that they could restart that one. Grant got passed. There's one in Michigan that they're trying to extend. One in Illinois got extended.
Okay.
There's 2 new ones getting built in Georgia. So like there is
There's
kind
that chance of them
Yeah.
having to just shut it down, but they always revisit it and then just look to see if it could get extended. Is that what you're kind of saying?
It's this weird shift of like there was shutting down, and shutting down wouldn't have necessarily affected what I was kind of bullish on anyway. But recently there's been this shift where the US and Europe is starting to now kind of take this viewpoint of, well, we can call nuclear green because it doesn't produce carbon. We can loop it in there with wind and solar and kind of just like push it forward with those bills. And so things that were expected to be gone are now ending up getting extensions.
Thank you. And then once again, so I can stay focused, you're interested in the mining aspect of uranium?
Yeah, so I play it
Thank
through
you.
the companies that mine the physical uranium itself.
So I have a more practical question for you with respect to like, maybe Wall Street bets and why we might be here. That is to say, go long or not or short. Which is like, why is this thing so volatile? Why is this sector so volatile when all these dynamics you've talked about are playing out over like decades? Why is it why does uranium seem to fluctuate so much in
Great
price?
question. So the reason is, like I said, it's got the market cap of Hershey's, but it's an entire sector. I mean, you guys know this. Everyone here loves their little like short squeezes, right? What's the thing you look at? You look at the market cap and the float. Well, when you got it's yes, it's big as far as like if it was one company, but when it's a whole sector, these companies are small, right? So when money comes in, it floods in and it pushes the stocks probably higher than they should go. When money comes out, it does the exact opposite. It pushes them probably lower than they should logically go. But it doesn't take a lot of capital when you're looking at a sector to make it move compared to like, tech, where again, like a Tesla is bigger than the entire uranium sector.
I think the interesting thing that when I'm looking at the financials for some of these companies is just that their cost of revenue and their operating income seems so high. Like I'm seeing EBITDAs that are like 70% of revenue. If it's really this profitable, and I'm looking at MP Materials, don't you see competition flooding in?
So as far as can competition come in, of course it does. So 2008 was the last uranium bull market. At the time, there were 500 companies that would call themselves uranium within their name to some degree, right? Made some claim of uranium use. Today, we've got like 60 left. I'm sure if another bull market comes, you'll hit 500. But it's a sector where, because again, there's that national security concern, there's that big scary thing. It's uranium, it's nuclear, it's scary. If I want to open a mine in Canada, I could have the best patch of uranium you'll ever find in your life. In fact, they found it up in northern Canada. They're thinking they'll maybe be ready by 2030, and they've already been spending about 6 years on it. The time it takes to get a permit, to get environmental approval, to get the locals on board with the idea that you're pulling a even if it's not that radioactive, it doesn't matter because the Godzilla movie told you it's going to kill you. The news told you it's going to kill you. There's just so many roadblocks that make it incredibly hard. Like if you had a company today that found a great patch of uranium and said like we're going to go get permits and build a mine, you're looking at a decade to 15 years, and that's if everything goes right.
That's a crazy lead time. Wow.
So
Sorry. So, go ahead.
would you say that the miners have a higher beta to the space than like uranium, the commodity? So if people were a little bit worried about execution risk or multiple players coming in, they might be able to just play the commodity as opposed to the miners.
You can play the commodity. There's actually a company that lets you play the commodity if you don't want to play like the futures of it. The Sprout Physical Uranium Trust is literally a company that just buys and sits on uranium when they can. There's nothing wrong with it. I play it through the miners just because that happens to be the area I feel comfortable with and that I know. It doesn't necessarily mean it's the best one. You can play it through an enrichment company like a Centrist Energy, who just runs a centrifuge and just enriches the uranium to turn it into fuel. It really just comes down to where you feel comfortable.
But in all cases, you're really betting on the value of uranium going up or the costs coming down.
Essentially, I mean, if you want to do like the overall, the bet that I tell people when they ask me is I essentially say it's a very binary bet. You're betting on one of two things happening. Either A, in the next 5 years, the price of uranium will hit the incentive price, get mines online, and provide the fuel necessary to keep the US fleet going. Or in 5 years, when you walk into a room in the US and flick the light switch, the lights may or may not turn on. And then I say, bet accordingly.
Well, it seems like both of these things are impacted by the cost of other energy prices. So if wind energy generation falls dramatically, then maybe uranium isn't so alluring. So do you look at or consider, how other energy sectors are evolving? Because if, uranium is such a long lag time between starting up a facility and getting paid out versus wind, where you can put up a turbine relatively quickly, does uranium necessarily make sense? Or are you taking on more risk there than maybe you might think at first glance?
I mean, to me, again, it makes, I hope this has answered your question. I have no problem with wind, and if people want to invest in wind or solar, like, go for it. Those are also great things. I happen to like them. Just, again, for me, I feel like because of how important it is, you kind of have to get that price going. So I feel comfortable going for the companies that I know, hey, once the price hits where they want it, they can be up and running in a year and a half. They've done this before. They've paid to the market before. They've been successful before. And so, could a wind company provide more value? Maybe, but I feel a little more comfortable that I'll get better value out of a market that goes, or out of a company that goes from not profitable to profitable than a company that goes from profitable to more profitable.
Yeah, fair enough. And so which companies in particular are you looking at?
So the big boy to play is a company called Cameco, ticker CCJ. I think it's CCO on the Toronto Stock Exchange. They're the biggest company in Canada. They're not the biggest company on the planet. They're the second biggest company, but they're the biggest company in Canada. They have the largest mines. They have some of the cheapest prices. They're actually still running one of their mines right now and planning on starting up a second one. They do have contracting deals. They can operate at a pretty significantly lower margin to other companies because of their size. So that's one that I've been looking at, that I've been in for a while. Another one is Energy Fuels, ticker UUUU. They're a US-based one. Now, I'll open with the US companies usually aren't as good as the Canadian companies, but I happen to like Energy Fuels just because it is the biggest one in the US right now. And as people know, for national security reasons, the US kind of does have a look at trying to buy internally when they can. So they will maybe not make the most money, but they will definitely benefit. And these are companies that have either produced before or were producing. So they're companies that I know I trust the management. Once they get the price that they want, they'll get their stuff up and running again. The problem is, as far as like other companies, most of these don't hit WallStreetBets market cap because it's a very tiny, non-profitable sector.
Well, fortunately, we can ignore market caps in this call. But I mean, just comparing even Cameco and MP Materials, which was mentioned earlier, I'm seeing they both have similar EBITDAs, but Cameco is, I think, almost double or more than double the market cap of MP Materials, and their revenue is significantly more. I think more than three times as much as MP Materials. So what's the difference between these two companies, if you're familiar?
I'm not as familiar. I believe MP plays in like rare earths and stuff like
Yeah.
that, right? I don't think
Yeah.
they're, which I can talk to because I like Energy Fuels, which also plays in rare earths, so I can speak to it. But a little bit of a different sector what they're playing in. So I guess, yeah, kind of the answer is MP's playing rare earth elements, which is not the uranium market.
Right. I brought up MP only because, you know, Chamath brought that into public markets through a SPAC, and he was citing that as, you know, kind of an input into solar, which is kind of where he is mostly focused. And so the rare earths that are necessary for solar, that are necessary for battery storage, particularly as well. Until you get that sort of stuff up to scale, you need a sort of regulating, you know, moderating supply, you know, source in order to handle for the, you know, the night and day and the wind or not that is, you know, with our existing renewable solutions. So MP is kind of an input play on renewable fuels, but I think, you know, nuclear and natural gas would be, you know, the interim solutions until you have a more sustainable, you know, regular source of renewable fuels that would be something like wind or solar plus batteries. So that's why it was brought up. MP is not really uranium in any sense.
And to keep this discussion fair, I will say, you know, because there are bear cases, this is not all roses and peaches, though I've been saying it that way. I will say there's a very clear and obvious bear case, and it is the greatest bear case that may exist in any market. If there's any reactor meltdown anywhere on the planet, you can kiss every penny you've put into any uranium company goodbye, pretty much. It doesn't even matter why it happened. So that is always the big looming cloud over the sector that exists. You can look at any chart of any of these companies and look at like before Fukushima, after Fukushima, and it's like, oh, I'm making money, I'm broke. Like, it's disgusting how hard it would fall.
Were you caught up in that? Sounds a little personal.
I avoided, thankfully. But yeah, you can look at those charts and you have to be aware of it because while it's unlikely that a meltdown happens, it's a reality that it could happen, and you have to, you know, especially when it's a play that you feel like might take a while, you have to accept that reality that, you know, you could set whatever stop loss you want. If a reactor melts down overnight, it's opening so past your stop loss, you're not seeing any of it.
Yeah, absolutely. So no point in setting stop limits. Is that what you're saying? Or stop losses?
I'm sorry, one more time.
So you're saying no point in putting up stop losses?
I will, because it's a very volatile sector, incredibly volatile. You know, the thing I like to point to people towards is, and after this, I'll post a DD that I've written because why not? Let's get some DD going. But in there, you'll see there's a chart of Energy Fuels, which is one of the companies I talked about back in 08, that gets referenced a lot. In that year, it did a 50x return. And I didn't stutter. That's a 50x return on its actual stock price. But over that year, it did a minus 50x, minus 30, minus 40, another minus 50, and I think another minus 30 on the way up, because that's kind of what this sector is. And so I always like to say to people like, hey, you know, if you're looking at uranium and saying like, this seems expensive right now, just wait a little bit. Come July, it'll probably be super cheap and you can get in. You don't have to rush. The prices will come back to you.
This sounds like a pretty juicy Theta Gang opportunity.
It can be. The thing with this sector is that it's one of those sectors that will be like, nothing's happening on board. Oh dear God, it did plus 10% in like 5 days, or oh dear God, it did minus 10% in 5 days. Where did that come from? So it's very much one where you'll be like, I'm safe to sell covered calls. These will never get touched. And then you'll wake up one morning and be like, it's well past those. Where did that come from? And then you'll look and there'll be like one piece of news. You'll be like, oh, well, that did it.
Yeah, Theta Gang sounds like they have the ability to go very, very wrong here.
But commensurately, you should be able to play the volatility fairly well, right?
Yeah,
I mean, does it mean revert at all, or is there like autocorrelation pretty badly here in stock price movement?
no, and I know people who do 100% just like wheel this, and that's perfectly fine if you want to do it. The only downside is when, if, I guess I'll be fair, if a massive rip does come, then you can find yourself being left behind. Energy fuels is like we'll just simple math, like $7 now. So you could sell like an $8 cover call and it feels fine. It feels fine. But if it was like $12 in a week out of nowhere, that would be a little shocking, but it's not something that the sector wouldn't just randomly do.
I'm thinking more like IV Crush, right? I mean, the same way you play, binary events, which you could look at with any company in their earnings, right? Where's Hardy when you need him? But you have a big pop, and there's a lot of people who are probably underwater for a really long time waiting for that pop, so they sell out, and the price starts to mean revert quickly, and you just rip off your, the put that you sold or the call that you sold, and just take advantage of IV Crush. Does that make any sense, or am I?
I get what you're saying. You can try it that way. Like I said, though, you'll have to wait through a lot of periods of boredom where the IV's not being so nice to you because it's just being very dull and just kind of bouncing around a channel and just stuck in there because that's what it'll do. And then you hope it breaks up, but it might break down, right?
So for people then who want to feel like they're getting an edge and maybe getting ahead of some of these big news spikes that could decimate their position, what would you recommend them doing? Should they be out searching regulation or reading the news, scouring for tidbits of information?
It's one of those hard ones because it's so hard to get ahead of because, again, the fear is like the meltdown, right? When the reactor in Ukraine got attacked. That was terrifying for anyone who's invested in uranium because it's like, oh dear God, they're bombing a reactor. What happens, And the whole world freaked out, and the sector took a hit because everyone was like, oh no, we're all gonna die, and it's uranium's fault. So, and it recovered quickly because people realized that it's actually safer than they can. Fun fact: a nuclear reactor can take a head-on collision from a full 747 and survive. But just like you can't really get ahead of that event, you know what I mean? Like, how are you prepping for a meltdown happened or someone decided to bomb a reactor? There's no, I don't know.
No, fair enough. Smallhead?
Yeah, I mean, if it were me and I knew that it could take a 747, but people freak out like that, I'd go and like sell, I don't know, 45-day out put, at the money, wherever, it seems to crash down to. And I've got to think that IV Crush plus a little bit of price rebound will make me be able to buy my puts back pretty easily for a profit.
Something else I will say to if anyone's looking to get into this, because I try to be transparent, it can be so painful, man. Like, especially through the summer. Like, I'll tell you right now, I like Energy Fuels. It's a $7 company. If it's July and it's down to like 5.30 again, I wouldn't be shocked. I'd be ready to buy, but I wouldn't be shocked. And I wouldn't be shocked if it went back up in November. These stocks, especially over the summer, because that's when the utilities runners are like on vacation, they'll just sell off because it's such a small sector. And it can feel like, oh dear God, this is dead. What have I done? So it really is one of those plays where like you need to be of that mindset of just like, I'm just going to hold and not check every day, because you will like have days where you're just like, what the hell? Nothing happened. And it's down 10% and I don't get why. And this is stupid.
Would you recommend that kind of volatility for newer traders?
If you can sit through it, there's money to be made. I guess it depends on, do you have the stomach for it? Like I said, Energy Fuels did a 50x. If you sat through it, you felt great, but you had to eat a few, minus 40s, a minus 50, and a couple minus 30s. Some people are able to sit through that. Other people, that's painful, right? So I want those people to know, like, you're signing up for the fact that it might do a minus 50 before it does a 2x for you.
Yeah, it sounds like emotions play a really big role in trading. Did you sit through the 50x? And if so, how did that feel for you?
I haven't sat through any 50Xs, but I have sat through a few doubles. I'm sure you're all aware, last year, Uranium was just like, hey, we're going to go double our stocks now because reasons, right? Which was great. And then they all pulled back. I think Energy Fuels capped out at like almost $11. And then over the summer got all the way down to like 420. Maybe it went to like 390. And it's just, I knew the ride I signed up for. So I just stayed on the roller coaster. But a lot of people get nauseous on that ride.
Wow. So you stayed on the roller coaster the whole time. You didn't try and jump off at the top.
I didn't think 10 was the top. I sold way out the money cover calls. You know, when it got to like $11, I was like, you know what? People are paying for $20 cover calls. And if you want to buy for $20 something I've been buying for $4.50, then fine. I will not cry if it goes to $50 and leaves me behind at that price.
Nice. How much did that covered call reduce your basis?
Oh, it's not a big sector, so it's not much. I think I was getting like 30 cents for the cover call, or $30. Sorry, 30 cents. Wow. Let's math this out. Like $30 for each call. So it's just a little bit here, but like I said, you know, it's I know the ride I signed up for, and I know that it can be obnoxious. So if you're gonna like jump in, just understand like this can be obnoxious.
And the reason you're on this ride to start with is because you deeply believe in the sector, or do you just enjoy kind of the chaos?
I'm on the ride because, again, like I said, one of two things are happening in 5 years. Either the price of uranium is going to meet the incentive price and I'm going to make money on this play, or the lights will not work when you walk into a room in the US. It's like super oversimplification, but that's really what the bet is. You can't have a country lose 18% of its electrical generation in 5 years and you're not replacing it with wind and solar. And I like wind and solar, and it could eat into a chunk of that. But you know, just a 3% energy fluctuation is what it takes to cause brownouts on a grid. If you're talking 18% of all electrical generation going away in 5 years because you have a fuel that is an inelastic fuel, you can't sub out uranium for anything. Either the power plant has it or it doesn't, then I'm betting on it's going to go up. And then you take into the fact that it's a fuel that the plants have to have. If a reactor's shut offline, that's $1 million a day that that plant loses every time it doesn't have that reactor spinning.
You're talking about brownouts, but do you think energy battery packs are going to help that at all, and maybe put some downwards pressure on the price that uranium can be sold for? Or is just uranium an absolute bedrock energy source?
I think right now, as a baseload energy source, it's too important. And I think that's the key, is that it's a baseload source. You can tell a nuclear power plant how much electricity you want. And there's a limited source of energy that you can do that with. You can do it with natural gas, which is what much of Europe, like Germany, has tried to do. You can do it with coal. Wind and solar and those other renewables are great. I love them. I want them to be built. But again, you can't turn to your wind farm and say, hey, we need more electricity, get the wind going.
Yeah, fair enough. Wind doesn't react to under pressure. Do you think that any of these uranium companies have any opportunity to expand overseas, or is all their potential really just in price changes and the commodity itself of your uranium?
So some of them are branching out into other areas. Like I said, Energy Fuels has started pushing towards rare earth elements, which are these really super long name things that good luck pronouncing, that are used for EV battery generation and other stuff. They're starting to get involved in some of that. Cameco is starting to push towards other forms of fuel generation. Sorry, enrichment of uranium, playing into the whole fuel cycle. Their big thing is trying to be, hey, you buy it from us out of the ground and we can turn it into the fuel that goes into your reactor in 2 years. And you don't have to talk to anyone else. We'll do the whole thing. So they're trying to make moves. And again, these companies do like sell to other countries, but they kind of stay within their area. Like an Energy Fuels is going to mostly have mines in the US. Chemical is going to mostly have mines in Canada. That's just kind of the nature of, they know how to get a mine permitted in that area. And it's a very different process depending on where you are, because different countries have different environmental regulations and feelings about it.
Fair enough. I've invited up a couple of people. Human Genome, would you like to ask a question?
I would. So I've been thinking about this for quite a while. And as far as the energy infrastructure goes, to me, it seems like today if we're going to compare it to something, with the energy infrastructure today, we're in the place where we were with mainframes 50 or 60 years ago, before distributed computing, before client server computing. And you've got a handful of large utilities and power companies in each state that are both producing and distributing the energy. Why not invoke the power of the people and create an energy appliance like plug power, so that you're not depending on the centralized power companies, just like you're depending on a centralized computer to do all your computing for you. You're not depending on a centralized power company to generate all the power for you. And you have an appliance in your home next to the water heater and the air conditioner that produces electricity that you need for your home. And then anything extra you can pump into the electric grid.
There's something on my roof that you could look into. It's called the residential solar. And it's not quite by your appliance, but it's usually above it.
Yeah, and I'm going to be honest. My focus is much more just on like the uranium market and nuclear. I have like the little bits I can give about the energy grid, but I can't like give you a full rundown of like breaking down how the energy grid's going to go and everything like that. That's just a little bit past me. A lot of bit past me, I'll be fair.
It's just it's a lot past
argument,
a lot of us, because it's too big of a leap, I think, right now to actually be done.
well, I mean, because you have things like the Powerwall, right? You have the Tesla Powerwall, you got other devices like that. And I mean, it's not that big of a leap, really, because like the energy infrastructure that we have today was designed for a time when people didn't have a lot of appliances that needed electricity, right? I mean, we're still using an infrastructure and a model for energy production and distribution before the microwave was invented, before the computer was invented, before your cell phone your smartphone was invented, before your Xbox was invented. Like when the electric grid that we have for today, it's not a leap, it's not a stretch, was designed for a different time and a different place. And today, just like with computing, we went from mainframe computing to mini computers to distributed computing with personal computers. If the same thing happens in energy production and distribution, where instead of having a centralized power company that distributes the energy to your home, you have a home that produces the energy that it needs, and its excess energy is distributed to the power company. Then it eliminates this threat of not having enough or having brownouts and stuff like that. Because the whole argument for nuclear and uranium is lack of energy and electricity to power the country. And what I'm saying is that I think there's a way that the energy production and distribution model can be configured following the example of the computers that could eliminate that problem. Like right now, if a mainframe goes down, I don't care, because I'm doing all my stuff on my personal computer at home. Just like the people right now that have solar on their home, like the people that had solar on their home in Florida after the hurricane, if their home survived and their solar panels survived, they were back up and running when everyone was still waiting for the power company to turn the power back on, because they were producing it there locally for what they needed.
Now, I have a fun question for you guys on that, since you mentioned the Tesla wall. Is this something that we should start looking into for companies such like Tesla, since they have, say the Powerwall, whoever owns EcoFlow or the Jackery, anything like that, something that we could possibly look into as well as on top of the uranium, something that might be going up cost or price wise, for the stocks, to where we could kind of bump up a little bit and then offset what our electrical consumption is, and then us personally avoid, say, like brownouts, blackouts. Is that something that we think might be something we could look into, possibly come out ahead?
Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, so I mean, the one-stop shop there is Enphase Energy. They have the best microinverters, and they also have battery storage, and they also
Ticker.
ENPH. But I mean, Jesus, guys, this is news from like a year and a half ago. So I think you kind of, I don't know, in my opinion, I'm missing the bus a little bit here. Yeah, I think maybe something for the original person talking about this. I think it was Rad. Like the correlation to other energy sectors. Do you get kind of most of the juice and the squeeze here from just playing oil? I mean, what's the sector correlation between like uranium and like renewables and oil? I mean, it seems like it's all sort of like you see the price of oil go up, you see the price of these solar stocks go up, right? Because the opportunity cost, the trade off cost for not doing renewable when oil is going up is higher. So you can price renewables higher. You can price alternatives, fuel sources like uranium higher. So are you kind of just like, are we just describing the energy sector generally here, guys?
So it does correlate right now to the energy sector, but it's not fully tied to it because it's kind of its own little subset. So I guess the simple answer is right now, yeah, but once companies start saying they're online, they're contracting, they have revenue coming in, because again, you're taking companies going from yearly losses to saying we're now profitable, that's going to make its own independent reaction from the market.
Sure. Do you ever hedge your bets in the mining space?
I don't, but there's absolutely nothing wrong if you wanted to.
Yeah.
And I will by no means tell anyone that I am playing this perfectly in any way, shape, and or form. I'm sure there are people who've played it far better than I.
I mean, always thinking and trying to take information in for different kind of sectors and investing, but I kind of see it as rising more for a defense use. Tell me if I'm wrong completely on that, more than just energy just source for the masses, using it more of like for defenses.
What do you mean by using it for defenses?
You're talking like depleted uranium rounds or bombs?
Yeah, like so like depleted uranium being used for defenses, would mining increase because of the usage of that?
No, this sector is going to be driven by the utilities. The utilities buy a ton of it. There's plenty of depleted uranium out there. It's all over the place. So there would be no need to get new amounts of it.
Copy.
Quick question for you. I don't know anything about this. I just jumped on because it seemed like something fun to listen to. It appears
Likewise.
that Australia they mine uranium like crazy. So, I mean, you can throw something in a container and ship it over, right? So, I mean, there's not really a shortage necessarily if it can be sourced from Namibia, Australia, any of these other places that have mines, and the cost in Australia is like $15 a pound, as opposed to your 60 or 80. I forget what you said earlier, but I mean, so there's, I mean, I don't think you're going to eat all that with shipping costs.
So when you say a $16 or $18 a pound, what you're reading, and that's a lot of companies will tell you that, what you're reading into is they're saying this is their price to simply pull it out of the ground. It's a very simplified price. A lot of companies have it that low. When I'm saying $65 to $70, I'm talking all in cost. I'm talking the pricing to maintain and continue that mine, the pricing to pay their staffing, the pricing to do everything that gets them through their day-to-day operations because this is their revenue source, the pricing to ship it, like every single penny that company has to spend in order to exist as a company. And then this is what they need to be making per pound sold in order to keep that operating going. A lot of companies will present this as just, oh, it's $16 a pound. But what they're saying is, well, that's just what it costs us to run the mine and pay the mine workers. But they're not going into all the other things that they have to pay for that actually keeps that business going.
I had a question, if I could ask for Rad. I'm wondering with the recent, maybe over the past couple of years, I think you mentioned the geopolitical sentiment toward nuclear is kind of changing, and the world's perception of it is now kind of going towards a green energy because it doesn't produce this carbon. How much of that depends on these politicians that are trying to regulate these things, or sentiment, or because it's 18% of what the United States uses right now for energy, how likely is that to go away? I know you talked about, coming in one day and trying to flick the switch and seeing if it would turn on or not. But how much of this is dependent on this recent sentiment over the past couple of years over, trying to go wind and solar and maybe other ways outside of nuclear, because so many people have had this bad perception of danger associated with this?
Great question. So this is not a play based on, oh, people now like nuclear and therefore it's going to work, or, oh, people are now starting to build nuclear and therefore it's going to work. It really is in its essence a play of just today, 18% is dependent on nuclear. Today, there's a 33% supply deficiency per year that's being filled in by a market being supplied by decades old shut down reactors that are now not going to be supplying that market as well. So that's kind of like the simple answer. Yes, there has been a sentiment shift, but that's been something that's happened while I've been playing this trade. I did not come into this expecting someone to tell me, oh, you're in nuclear, that's a green energy. I didn't think anyone was going to say this was green energy. I thought people were going to be like, oh, you're in nuclear. Doesn't that like make people's heads melt and turn them into Godzilla? And I was going to say, okay, that's fine. That's what the world thinks, right? So this was that type of like mindset shift. The fact that like Germany's keeping 3 reactors online, I was expecting Germany to shut those off and freeze. I fully expected them to be like, we'd rather freeze than have 3 reactors running up until April, because that's just how it's been. And none of that impacts this play for me. To me, that's just like, oh, that's a cool bonus, but I'm not going to bet on what politicians do. But if they want to be on board with it, then that's nice to know.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think anybody would have anticipated this back when Fukushima was happening, that anybody would start to say anything positive whatsoever about continuing or building upon the nuclear energy infrastructure sector.
The fact that the Japanese population are now more in favor of having their reactors online than out of favor shows just the crazy shift in mindset that the world has had. These are the people who literally lived through Fukushima saying, hey, bring it back, we need it. Right? And again, that's the type of thing that if you ask me, I'd be like, no, they're not going to want that. Why would they? They lived through a meltdown. No one's going to want to be near that. But apparently they do. Okay.
Incredible. Thank you.
So I got another question on nuclear use. What do we know what the military contracts and whatnot for like their submarines? Do we know anything about that? Because I just thought of that and I was like,
All those uses for like submarines and nukes and all that other stuff is negligible.
Yeah.
It's incredibly tiny. It's going to be super non-meaningful to the overall sector. When it really does for these companies come down to getting their mines online, and selling into utilities, because again, they rely on these usually about 10-year long contracts that they sign with these utilities at these set prices, right? And then they kind of say, we're going to deliver to you over 10 years within like a certain price range, and that's how these companies operate, and that's how they work. So they can't rely on things like, well, maybe the military will need like a couple new submarines and they can deliver like a small amount. It doesn't play into their books.
Yeah, you're probably better off playing like General Dynamics for the nuclear sub angle, and it has like the Gulf Stream kicker as well. So it's a interesting play. Again, it's made a move as well. I think a lot of the industrials are kind of running pretty hot right now. So buyer beware. But General Dynamics is a pretty interesting play for a nuclear sub in terms of defense there. Question for you, Rad. Do you know much about Rio Tinto? And does it have uranium mining?
Rio Tinto and BHP both have some uranium mining, but they're not uranium companies. So they're
Right.
one of those companies that will supply the spot market. They'll be digging for gold. Some uranium will come out. They're permitted for it. They'll just sell it straight into the market. They don't care. It's just something that comes out.
Have you ever looked at some of their income statements if they break down by commodity income? If it's like single digit percentage, if it's much less than that? I mean, interesting diversification play in the mining space, and if it has a meaningful uranium kicker, that might be an interesting play, especially because it has a good dividend.
They're not going to be companies that it's going to have an impact for them. It's going to be very negligible because again, it's they're not looking for it, and when it comes out, they're very much just like, who wants to buy this? This was
Yeah,
like, why is this here?
sure. Okay, thanks.
I think we're all just absorbing all this information.
Yeah, definitely a lot of information. I just don't see how people are scared to get nuked, but every day or whatever you hear something on the news about getting nuked, but everyone's going to be all right using this kind of source of energy.
Well,
I think
it's
I'll just say, because at the end of the day, what people want is they want things to work, right? So I'm going to give what is kind of a bad example, but it's a tangential example. I'm going to open with very clearly saying oil is not uranium. It is a much more important market in many, many ways, right? But nonetheless, when oil was under $60 a barrel, you had a bunch of people coming up like, it'll never be at $60 a barrel again. Oil's done. We're on EVs now. It's the EV future. Oil's dead. And what happened? It needed to be at $60 a barrel to hit the production necessity to keep companies going and meet the world's demand. It got there and it shot past it. And now no one's talking about, oh, oil can't be at $60. Everyone's going, why don't we buy oil under 60? Now, am I saying uranium is oil? It's not as important, but it has that same type of setup as everyone sits there going, well, it's going to be wind, it's going to be solar. And wind and solar will exist. But just like for oil, there's too many cars on the road today that need oil that you can't just say they're all going to become Teslas tomorrow. There's too many nuclear reactors today powering cities to say, well, it's just going to become a wind farm tomorrow. It takes too long.
And I think it'd just take too long to educate. I don't know. I'm still trying to wrap my mind around all the information you provided. Great information, though.
Yeah, I actually, as kind of a contrarian opinion, Rad, can you think of a reason why LNG is not um, a very close analog to what's going on here from an industry dynamics perspective, from a demand perspective, from a bridge fuel sort of perspective, without some of the binary events there?
Sorry, one more time.
Liquid natural gas.
Oh, no, I know what you're talking about with LNG. Just what was the question?
Oh, basically, like, if we were doing a top trumps sort of debate, or if this was an actual cage match with an opponent, if I had LNG in one corner, I had uranium in the other, what would you? Could I without going through the entire rationale for it, I'm thinking that LNG is probably very similarly set up here, but it doesn't have these really nasty binary events that you're talking about, which admittedly could be positive, but also could be drastically negative, as you described. Could have you thought about LNG as a potential alternative to your thesis here in uranium?
I have no problem with LNG. As far as I'm aware, though, I believe LNG is pretty pumped up right now because of all the stuff with Europe and all those fears, right? So it's, I think, well past its incentive price to get companies going. If anything, companies are that, right? It's like the oil sector, right? Companies that almost shouldn't exist are now existing because it's kind of overpumped. So I would almost say, like, I have no problem with it, but it's a market that I think it's not like uranium where it's the companies aren't operating because it's too cheap. It's almost a sector where it's like some of these companies that you're like, oh, they're pulling like sludge out of the ground with sand in it, but they can get away with it because people are desperate to get it, right?
Okay.
But none of my overall like point from this is to say like nuclear is the future, because I know there's a lot of people out there who are like that, who will tell you like, oh, it's going to be nuclear power plants everywhere and that's all everyone's going to have. I'm not doing that, and that's not what I'm saying. I'm just talking purely from an investment standpoint. You've got a sector that's needed. It's too low in price, and so the price needs to come up in order to keep the sector going, and it's a sector that's too important to disappear. And that's really the fundamentals. If you could take these, if you told me Tesla was set up like that, I'd be into Tesla. If you told me Apple was set up like that, I'd be into Apple, right? It just happens to be that uranium has that setup. It's not that I particularly love uranium and it's the best thing in the world. It just has that setup.
What makes the companies that you're talking about, not to go back to, importing, but what makes them a better play? Because, right, you need the uranium to keep the 18% online, is what you're saying. So who cares where it comes from? I mean, is there a guarantee that domestic uranium delivered to the door of the, power plant is going to be cheaper per kilogram or pound or however they do it than, something from Africa, from Australia, from, any of these other places that produce high amounts?
So I like those companies because they produced before. A lot of the companies in Africa are new upcoming companies. I can opinion. You said market caps don't matter, right?
Yeah, let's go for it. Free for all.
Awesome. So I can tell you, Deep Yellow is a company I love out of Australia. They're building a mine in Namibia. They don't have one yet. They're working on building it, but they're going to get a mine going up there. Hopefully, Global Atomic is a company out of Canada that's building a mine in Africa. There's a lot of companies in Africa that are building mines, but they don't have them built yet. And the thing to understand about Africa in particular, African uranium tends to be, Canada tends to have the best uranium. Well, Canada has the best uranium. Kazakhstan has the cheapest uranium. We'll do it like that. And the reason Kazakhstan is the cheapest is because Kazakhstan doesn't care about environmental regulations. Kazakhstan gets their uranium by dumping sulfuric acid into the ground, dissolving it, and pulling it back up. And sulfuric acid costs nothing. The other companies have to use this kind of carbonated water, which is much more safer for the environment, but also a bit more expensive. So Kazakhstan, cheapest uranium on the planet. Canada, best patches, but a little more expensive. Africa, a lot of it is just like enriched sand, which can be turned into usable uranium, but they need higher prices there. But as far as like the market breakdown, one of the big things that's come out of this war with Ukraine is the Western world especially, has pushed towards a very bifurcated market. So if you look at like the oil market, there's the oil that can be sold out of Russia through like India and Turkey, but it's totally not Russian oil, right? And then there's like the oil that's sold from the Western world, and kind of the two sides play. Like China will buy from Russia, but the US won't, right? And it's kind of the same thing. Like that market's going to be kind of the same setup. Kazakhstan, it provides the most uranium in the world, but the Western world always has that concern of, hey, if I sign a 10-year contract with Kazakhstan and then Putin says, you know what, I've decided Kazakhstan's actually Russia part 2, you've got a 10-year contract you were banking on that now is at risk. If you sign that same contract for a little bit more with a company in Nevada, yeah, you paid more, but you're not worried that Putin's going to want Nevada. And if it gets to that point, you've got bigger issues than is your uranium shipment coming in, right? Or if that contract's with Alberta. So that's also something that's played into the mind of a lot of these utilities, is they're starting to realize that, because Russia does about 20% of the world's uranium enrichment, and they're starting to realize that having that reliance on, hey, can we trust Russia or things connected to Russia? Kazakhstan ships out of St. Petersburg when they send their uranium over to the West. Can we trust that? Or do we want to pay a little more, but to know that we've got a decade of secured supply that we know will be secured? And I hope that answers that.
Can you quickly speak to Australia, since they are, pretty decidedly an ally? And I don't know. I mean, what about sourcing out of there? And I'm not trying to you know what I mean? But I figure this is the point of the thing, right? Is to have the back and forth and just kind of cover all the bases. So I don't mean to be argumentative by any means. I just, just trying to get some answers.
Some will come from Australian companies. And there is some produced in Australia, but again, that's a difficult one. The Australian government is like the US and Canada. They're very picky about those permits and they fight hard with companies. But some will come out of there. But a lot of those Australian companies have their mines in Africa. And a lot of those African mines, honestly, are China's looking right at them. China wants to buy them, and China's probably going to offer top dollar. One of the best uranium deposits found in like the last 100 years is up in Canada. It's called NextGen. It's in the middle of nowhere. A Chinese company tried to buy it out. They were about to sign that paper until the local government of Canada stepped in and said, we're not having a Chinese company running a uranium mine in Canada, right? Or else they would have done it. So now China's looking right towards Africa and saying, hey, if we can't buy those, will buy those mines in Africa. And a lot of them are Australian run. And a lot of those companies have said they want to produce themselves. But if someone comes in with a good sized check that returns value to their shareholders, they will accept that deal.
Well, could I ask what do you think the Chinese, so the Chinese across different industries in Africa have been trying to build influence and really build that relationship to be able to be partners with a lot of the governments there to open up these mines, not just with uranium, but other things. But what do you think the Chinese influence there? How do you think that could affect the market moving forward if the U.S. Say has less access to that cheaper uranium?
So again, the best uranium right now comes from Kazakhstan and Canada. Kazakhstan, there's a little bit of an iffiness to it. Canada, the US feels very comfortable buying from there and they trust those companies and those companies are reliable and they have giant reliable patches. As far as the African companies go, China does have some influence there and it's very likely that those are going to be companies that are selling to China or Russia or other Eastern nations more so than the US. And if that's the case, then that's just kind of the breakdown. Canada and the US should have enough production to supply the US utilities when they're up and running. And again, this assumes that planned mines become actual mines, which is a whole nother thing to go into. Uranium mines, I think, from discovery have about a 10% success rate to go from finding a patch to actually getting their mine up and running for all sorts of reasons. But that's kind of like, I hope that answers the question.
It does. Are there any indicators now that the U.S. government would be interested in subsidizing any of these utilities, companies that are looking into this?
So what the US has done is they've approved a uranium reserve, which is going to be purchased from US companies. The rules specifically are it has to be US mined within the last 10 years, which, I mean, literally there's like 4 companies that meet that requirement. Peninsula, Cameco, because they have one US mine that they don't like using a lot, but they do have it. Energy Fuels, and then a very small company called UR Energy, which is in Wyoming, which also meets those requirements. Those are kind of the 4 in the US that have done it before. But that contract's been out for like over a year now. And those companies have put in their bids, and the US has been like, we'll get to it. So they are building like a small national reserve, but there hasn't been any talk about subsidizing utilities yet. But you also have to consider the fact, again, this is a product that the utilities right now feel like they can just go out there and buy it for cheap. So there's no reason for them to push the government to say, hey, we need a subsidy. They've got an easy, cheap secondary supply right now. So they're not feeling that pressure. If the price starts going up, they might. But uranium also as an energy source is a very low cost for a nuclear power plant. It accounts for about 5% of their overall operational costs, which is incredibly low if you compare it to like natural gas or coal or other sources.
I have a question. You've talked a lot about foreign sources of uranium. How abundant is uranium domestically here in the States?
So there are companies that can produce it when the price goes up. Right now, there is, to my knowledge, no current company in the US producing uranium. There might be 1 or 2 really small ones that have done a little bit of production, but there's really not any going on in the US right now. It's not economic. And the US doesn't have the best uranium patches, but it does have them. But it's also, by the way, uranium, not a very rare substance. It is all over the place to the point where you can actually mine uranium out of the ocean. Just fun fact for you, it would cost about $200 a pound to get that market going, but you can mine reasonable amounts of uranium out of ocean water. So it's not a rare substance. It's just, again, it's a very hard thing to get a permitted mine up and running. It takes a decade. And so there are US companies that do it, but most of them, it's not economic. So they're shut down. They're waiting. They're essentially sitting there saying to the utilities, we want to sell to you, but we need this price. And the utilities are sitting there saying, we don't need to buy from you because this guy's got a storage thing up in Canada that we can buy it from. And so we're not going to sign a 10-year deal with you right now.
Is that just for, I understand that uranium is abundant. It's just the refining that can be costly. Is that so? Are these companies just for utilities, or does the United States also buy its source of uranium for its, let's say, weapons? We're going to go shift a little bit to defense. Does the United States mine its own uranium for defense, or does it also take in uranium from foreign companies?
It's a negligible amount, very negligible. So one thing you have to understand about uranium is it's an incredibly energy efficient fuel source. I think I'd have to look it up, but I believe it was something like a pound, a like golf ball sized piece of uranium has like 1 billion calories inside of it. So once you like enrich it, it's got a ton of energy into it. So when you're talking about like, a nuclear warhead, it's a very negligible amount versus what you would need to actually build the fuel for a reactor to run that reactor for 2 years. So that's really where their bottom line is hit, much more than the government maybe periodically saying we need a little bit. And again, for a warhead, you can use spent fuel and run it through a centrifuge and add some energy to it. So there are ways to do it without having to just like get the uranium itself. In fact, I'll even add in the 2008 uranium market boom happened because they ended decommissioning nuclear warheads. There was a program between the US and Russia where they were decommissioning warheads, and those decommissioned fuel rods were then reran through a centrifuge, turned into nuclear fuel rods, and being sent into power plants as cheap energy sources.
To go back to the cost of operation for the mines, what's the biggest thing that hits their bottom line? Is it like specialty machinery? Is it you mentioned carbonized water being used? What's the big cost for them that they have to overcome? Is it regulations and just the time that you have to invest in getting through all the hoops?
So I actually don't know the specific breakdown of like what cost them what. I just kind of know like what the overall consensus needed price is per company. I do know a lot of the companies have come out now and said one of their biggest concerns is for the ones building mines is in materials because of supply chain issues and because of inflation. But another huge concern for companies right now are just skilled labor. There's not that many people on the planet who know how to successfully run a uranium mine. That's a very specialized skill. And many of them who exist are already held on to at a company. So you'll see, like, if you follow the sector, you'll see, like, a lot of these companies are, like, going to other companies. They're like, I'm going to get a mine up in 2 years. And they're going to those other companies and being like, hey, you've worked on the mine for 10 years. Can you come over and run our mine? Like, do you know enough? Because it is hard to find people who can do this, who are available. So I hope that kind of answers it.
My phone died, so excuse me if this has been discussed before. But so let's say it's in the future, and we have like this nuclear energy infrastructure in place. What do you see as some of the biggest risks involved with that?
The biggest risk for nuclear will always be a meltdown. There will never be another risk on the planet that will be a bigger problem. People freak out. Perfect example. Everyone, I say Fukushima, every single one of you goes, oh my God, I've heard of that. Thousands of people died, right? It hits you right in the head. What if I told you, and this is a fact, not one person died from Fukushima due to radiation exposure? To this day, there's not been a single recorded death of radiation exposure. It was all because of the tsunami and the wave. But that's not what you think of, right? You think of a power plant melted down and thousands of people died. Just the perception of a meltdown is enough to get people terrified.
Understood, but the cause was the effect was the meltdown. But I'm like causality, like the tsunami is a good example of something that nobody expected would ever really happen. Those, like, what would be the causality of the risks? What would you see?
Like what could cause a meltdown?
Yeah, like here in the U.S., like what would be the chain of events that would lead to a meltdown being initiated? Like in Japan, it was a tsunami, but here in the U.S., let's say we have another pandemic where everybody has to stay home or get quarantined, or who knows what. Like, what would you see the risks being if there's all these nuclear power plants all over the place?
So the risk would be for a potential meltdown in the US would be some type of natural disaster is the most likely one outside of like a terrorist attack. I will add in most power plants are designed with a lot of fail safes. So I'll go back to Fukushima. Fukushima had backup generators on the floor that, had they worked properly, would have kicked on, gotten the reactor back online, and then stopped the whole process and prevented the meltdown. The problem was they were on the ground floor, a place where that company had been told multiple times they needed to be removed from because a flood would cause those generators to shut down. If they put those same generators on the 4th floor, you wouldn't have heard about Fukushima. So it really comes down to like, there are natural disasters can do this, but there's been a lot of tech upgrades that have gone into making these things less likely. I always point out to people, Fukushima was an older nuclear power plant than Chernobyl, right? So that was not as up to date as people think it was.
In fact, just to iterate that, a lot of the case studies that reviewed it, they had warnings since the 80s about upgrading. That tsunami, yes, it was larger than, it was a higher probability than they had predicted. They had still predicted a tsunami impact, but they had warnings since the late 80s about having to upgrade it as you mentioned, to having their generators higher up, to different casings they knew full well that they should have upgraded.
Yeah, the previous generation reactor design was pretty prone to the runaway events, but the modern designs have totally eliminated that through passive cool down functions, essentially. I'd have to do more research to get details, but that's the gist that I remember from a couple of years ago.
And that's another factor in it. A lot of these newer reactors are built much safer and with a lot of these fail safes, because there have been meltdowns and people are aware and they make these changes. But the reality, again, is like, it's bad for your investment. But as far as like an actual safety source goes, nuclear energy has the lowest death per kilowatt hour, tied with, I believe, wind, of any electrical generation source on the planet. It actually doesn't kill a lot of people. It's just when an event happens, like a 3 Mile Island, which again, no actual recorded deaths from the meltdown, but there was a meltdown, or a Chernobyl, it's front page news. If somebody gets killed building a solar panel, that's not front page news because that's not interesting.
The only caveat to that, I guess, is the economic damage of losing the territory around it after a meltdown for a period of time.
Yeah, there are other factors that play into it. I'm not. Please don't think that I'm trying to like downplay.
No, of course
like
not.
Chernobyl was nothing. Like, no, these were big events.
Hey, this is a really cool chat. I really appreciate you guys putting this on today, and really good information. I just had like a question, like about like reactors, like the CANDU reactors in Canada and South Korea, as well as like the newer small modular reactors, and even like maybe you could comment around the safety around those, because I could be wrong, but I think like the process of how they work isn't as dangerous as conventional reactors. Like, it doesn't really, like, the risk of meltdown is like almost neutral. But yeah.
There's a lot of new fail safes that have been put into reactors. I don't know all of them off the top of my head, to be quite honest with you, but there's a lot of stuff that have been, again, so like when I said like the reactor in Ukraine can take a full-on hit from a full 747 because of the shell casing that it has. That came into existence because after 9/11, everyone said, what if someone flew a airplane into a nuclear power plant? And then they decided, all right, every single reactor has to have a casing around it that can handle the 747. They make these new reactors, and it's kind of the same thing. People, because it is such a scary event of what if there actually was like a legit meltdown, they think through these things and they kind of say, like, what can we do to solve it? I think the newer reactors now have like a fail-safe where if it starts detecting a meltdown of some source, like it actually drops the fuel rods into like a water source that's kept below it in order to completely like stop it from happening. There's a lot of tech that goes into it, and they are safer. Again, I don't want to play it off like, oh, this could never go wrong, because things can happen. But yeah, the newer ones, the smaller modular reactors that are designed to be put up quicker, are all supposed to be a lot safer and have had a lot of smart minds go into them. And when you hear about like these big disasters that have happened, they've been these older generation reactors that had those issues. that the newer ones have accounted for to not repeat.
I agree.
Do you know anything about the companies that refine uranium into the fuel rods that are needed for reactors? I'm assuming that's at least done domestically.
Honestly, that doesn't matter in the long run, though, if they're uranium.
So one company that I'm aware of that does enrichment of uranium is a company called Centrist Energy, LEU. They do a lot of enrichment. Their stock has been hit pretty hard. I think it's recovered now because I don't really play that side, but their stock took some hits when the Ukraine war happened because they had several contracts with Russia. Russia accounted for about 20% of the world's uranium enrichment, and that's something that they've been very involved in.
I actually believe that's not true. That's not true, right?
That Russia does about 20% of the world's enrichment of uranium?
No. I heard it was Europe.
No, it's Russia. Russia has the technical knowledge as well, much more than anywhere else.
They're very involved in enrichment, not in mining, in the enrichment of it and spinning it in the centrifuge, turning it into fuels, and then selling it out. That's something Russia plays big in.
And also
it's disgusting.
The installation. They are also the leaders in building nuclear plants in the world right now. Maybe I'm wrong.
That I don't actually know if they're the leaders in the new builds. I know the U.S. is involved in a few of those, but just to give an idea of like how involved Russia is in the enrichment, the reason there hasn't been a uranium ban is because, again, they do like 20% of the world's enrichment, and that would have been way too impactful to the nuclear power plants in the U.S. And that was something they brought up. They were like, we can't secure supply fast enough if you don't let us get their enrichment, because this is a 2-year process, and the companies that do provide enrichment can't fill in those orders. Most of those companies have full books already. They can't like just slide their fuel in.
What happens when they can slide their fuel in?
Oh boy, I'll try not to get too super into this. So I don't. Do we need to get so technical in this?
No, we don't. We don't need to get that technical. I don't want to. I don't want to do that. Yeah.
Fuel rod in, there will be a happy end.
There is I can post a link. There is a awesome How It's Made episode that goes over turning uranium into a fuel source. They focus specifically on ISR mining, which is the type I talked about, where they pump in a liquid and then dissolve it and then dry off that liquid and sell it off. That's the most common method. About 50% of mines run that. The other method is just like, regular mining it out, which is what actually happens in Canada, because Canada has very sandy soil, and sand plus water does not stay where it's supposed to be. But most mines run off this method. So if you actually search like How It's Made nuclear fuel rods, and I'll try to drop it in the comments later, there's like a good 30-minute episode that goes through pulling it out of the ground all the way through to like turned into fuel that then gets inserted into the reactor.
I just don't. I don't know, man.
I think
Perpetual,
Dennis
you were the one who came in asking about how to file bankruptcy on a loan as soon as you took it out. So
that is true. Were you from the other chat?
Yeah, I was listening into that one.
Oh, okay. Yes, I was trying to file.
Yeah, so I'm not going to take your word on nuclear energy sources.
I appreciate you being so honest.
Thank you.
Good luck with the loan. Jeez.
Chime in though to
the
point earlier. Uranium is such a dense energy source that there's a reason the market cap is so low, because there's really just not that much money to be made in it. It's a pretty abundant material. It does come up during other mining operations, and it's really more about the refinement process, which is also just low margin and kind of forced hand. So I'm optimistic that it's going to grow, but I don't think it's going to be massive growth. I think it's going to be something where we continue to get more efficient with the use and or find other nuclear materials.
So there are the margin side of it. One of the things I haven't brought up here, and I'll get into because 1 second, sorry.
I did some quick digging on the modern safety features. The current generation stuff is the 3rd generation reactors, and a lot of them use different essentially geometries that prevent the rods or the other fuel sources from getting to runaway temperatures, just due to the actual like physics of how they shoot off their atomic material. So there's a number of different passive safety features that have been implemented to where they are virtually they'd be incapable of going into a runaway state.
Do you have any idea if those safety features are universally accepted across, the different mining or the different utilities companies of the world?
I don't think there are yet, just because nuclear is kind of that boogeyman. But I'm sure as it becomes more and more prominent, it'll be standardized, if it isn't already. I don't know a ton about the regulations of the sector.
Do you think the goal of countries becoming carbon neutral or meeting a certain carbon limit will encourage more countries to turn to nuclear or keep existing nuclear plants open? Or do you think it'll be more of an economic driving force? I'm guessing I'm asking, is it one or the other? Is it happy green energy source, or is it monetary, or maybe both?
It's one of the highest density energy sources. So even as we add the continuing green and sustainable energy sources, it's going to be something that provides the volume that we need for all the increased power needs of today's society. Especially as we look like electric semi trucks and things like that are just going to require massive overnight power and things like that.
And as far as the green kind of like mindset of it, even Europe recently, the European Commission actually voted to allow nuclear to be considered a green investment for the purposes of European investment funds. Starting in 2023, they can within their portfolios call it like a green investment, as if they were going into wind or solar or one of those other things. So just like a huge mindset shift that came out of nowhere.
I'm sorry if this is a repeat of previous questions, but what's your knowledge of thorium reactors? I know very little, to be honest. So if you already talked about it, I can just listen after.
I can talk about thorium. I'm aware of it. As far as I know, right now, there's only one quote unquote like running thorium reactor, which is in China. They've like tried some testing on it to get a thorium reactor going, and they've done a little bit on it. It's something that could come in down the line. It would still need uranium just to a lesser degree in order to run them. But from what I understand, it's still kind of in that like future tech of like, yeah, it would be awesome and it might happen in like 5 to 10 years, but it's not commercial yet.
It's not 0 to 5. It's still 5 to 10. Is that what you're saying? Pretty much.
Yeah, or more. 5 to 10 might be like pretty generous to it. Because I remember reading into it, there were some concerns that the thorium it runs hotter, so it has some feedback issues where it could potentially cause explosions that you wouldn't get from just regular uranium fuel rods. Again, I haven't done a ton of look into it because it really is like outside the scope of what is this play for me.
Okay, understood.
I don't know if you've talked about this company already, but one that I've accumulated some shares in is Denison Mines in Canada. I figured with the thesis around like Russia being closed off as a partner for uranium, like that Canadian developers will do better. I just wanted to get your thoughts on that. Unless you already brought it up, then I'll listen to previous comments on that.
I have not talked about Denison. I'll try to keep this short. Denison is a fine company. I'm invested with them. They are a risky company. They're a risky company for one simple reason. Remember I said in Canada they can't mine using the liquid solution because the soil's too sandy? Denison's trying to do it anyway. They have 2 sites. They have their flagship site, which is Phoenix, and their site at Griffin. They're trying to get their Phoenix site up by 2025 is their plan. And their plan and what they've been working on is to essentially inject water into the ground, freeze off the outer layer around the uranium, dump in the solution, pull the solution back up, and use that frozen water layer to fill in for what should be harder rock. They've been testing it. It's been successful, and it's working. They still need to get it fully permitted, which we'll see if Canada's going to be cool with it. They have to prove that they can fully pull back that solution, which so far has been fine on smaller scales. But the other side of it is, if they can't pull that off, that entire Phoenix site is unusable, and that stock is going to see a good 60% haircut on that news. But if it works, they will have one of the cheapest uranium mines on the planet. And they'll also be an incredibly desirable company from an M&A perspective, because now they've got new tech that other companies are going to want to buy them out to get, but also they'll have the ability to buy up nearby mines that were not feasible that they can run through that method.
That's pretty fascinating. Thank you. Appreciate that.
All right, I got one for you, Rad. So I'll preface this by saying I've been sipping the Rad Kool-Aid for a very long time now, so I'm very slightly biased in my take on all the uranium stuff. But it is volatile market, and anyone who I think has been involved in that is well aware of that. But one of the problems I run into, and I know you probably track it much more than I do, but news sources and things that truly affect the market, with things you get an article drop and things that happen that affect the market. How do you follow that? Because 90% of the time I see a 10% drop and the news story is like the bot generated, what's happening with uranium today? And it tells you nothing. So how do you look for what is going on, what's happening currently, and how do you follow it?
I'm playing it long term. So there's a few like Twitter sources and other like YouTube particular people who I trust, who don't run their own YouTube channels, but they're just people who will like do talks that will talk about uranium sometime, who I'll watch. But the honest answer is, when I'm playing this, like if I look and it's Tuesday and there's a 10% drop on a company or like in the sector, I might just quickly Google to make sure that like Denison Mine didn't announce that their ISR project's not working, and now, oh dear God, here comes the haircut. But I'll like check a couple sources, but usually there was nothing major. And in the grand scheme of things, it just doesn't matter. If I have cash, I might buy. If I don't, then whatever. Again, it's a sector I don't check all the time, because a lot of times the news doesn't matter. It'll take that 10% haircut, and then in 2 days, people will be like, oh, that was nothing. And then it's back to where it was. So you just kind of brush it off. But it is a pain in the rear to sit through. And I understand why people don't like doing it, because it can be obnoxious like that, where you're just like, well, why did that move it 10% down? That doesn't make sense. And it happens.
Yeah, say, because that's basically kind of my experience. Because yeah, I'm with you. Like I said, I've been sipping this Kool-Aid for a while now, so I follow it like just the same. And I was wondering how you react to that the same way, because I see those 10% drops. I'm like, what happened? I didn't see anything happen. This makes no sense. But that completely answers my question. So thank you.
The big things I would look for when I'm in the sector, the things that I want to pay attention to, was there a meltdown somewhere? Did some country or some other supplier come out saying that they have a lot more supply than people realized was out there, or things like that? Or is some nation that has a large supply now saying that they're going to go through major decommissionings? If tomorrow France said, hey, we're done with nuclear, all right, now we're in trouble, because they have plenty that they can sell into the market. That's worse than when Fukushima happened, right? If Japan says, hey, you know what, we're not interested anymore, that would have immediate impact, because that's a lot of restart demand that was expected that would be going away. If the US said we're done, that could definitely have a huge impact. So I'll look for like major things like that, but it's almost never something like that. It's always like, oh, Germany's keeping 3 reactors online, which, yeah, that's great, get hyped about, but like, I don't care that Germany's running 3 reactors until April. That doesn't affect my overall long-term play. Like, good for them. They're going to shut it down in April. What does that change for me?
What do you know about smaller modular reactors that I've been, seeing little bits and pieces of on the internet? I saw Bill Gates talk about one. I saw something at Idaho National Laboratories talk about it. But essentially, it's like a trailer, or a Conex box, a big Conex box with a reactor in it. And it's just really small, and it can power, a part of a city or a neighborhood, or what, I don't know what the scale is.
It is something Bill Gates has been working on out of Wyoming. And it is, the premise is essentially, for lack of a better term, it's like an IKEA reactor where it's like quick put together and you can kind of build it up much quicker, because power plants take a long time to build. It takes about a decade if you were starting to build one now to get it finished and running. It's a long time, and it's very stupid expensive, and companies don't like doing it because do you really want to put a decade's worth of money into building something that you might be told is now shut down because a meltdown happened somewhere? So the premise is they're quicker builds because they piece together, and so they can get that going. It's not, as far as I'm aware, it's not done yet, and maybe someone can speak better to it, but it is something that like people like Bill Gates are working on because he does believe nuclear needs to play a role within the electrical future.
How would you feel personally if a Bill Gates reactor box was parked outside in your backyard to, power your neighborhood?
That's the NIMBY answer, right? The not in my backyard. Nobody wants it.
I'd rather that than a coal plant.
But here's the thing. Would I want a nuclear reactor in my backyard? No, I wouldn't be very fond of it. But you know what'll piss off people much more than a new power plant getting built? Being told, hey, we're rationing electricity today from 12 o'clock to 5 p.m. Then you'll see people actually have an issue.
And if I can touch on this too, I'm in Georgia right now, and they are building 2 nuclear power plants right now. I'm only aware of that because I follow the uranium market, but I will say every time I've brought that point up to anyone, I have yet to meet another person who was in the state that knew that was happening. It's in the so like it's very unknown, or people aren't caring enough to even pay attention to it. So I think the fear is more overblown by what you see on Twitter and what the news anchor is pushing, because it's, fear, scary, bad. Let's talk about what did blow up and let's not talk about what didn't. But I think real people more just so it's like, okay, cool. And then they just kind of move on with their life.
And again, it's 18% of the US's generation, 10% globally. There's a very strong chance your home or your business or someplace you go to has some type of nuclear involved in powering it. You just don't know it because, like, when people say, hey, in my backyard, yeah, your backyard, but like they're not building it next to your home, right? Like, you just don't know it's there.
Yeah,
Are there any private businesses that are in the storage of waste uranium?
So nuclear waste is one of those things that comes up that people always talk about because it is like, it's not the issue that people think it is. There's no private companies that do it, but I do want to just speak to nuclear waste. If you took all the current existing nuclear waste that has been generated since we've opened the first ever nuclear power plant on the planet, if you took all of it, every single piece, it would fit inside an NFL field stacked up 5 feet high. That would be all of it ever generated. It always comes up. It's not that it's not a thing, but it is a significantly small amount of material.
Yeah, I was looking for a play. I wasn't. I wasn't that.
I'm sorry. There's no company that I know of. There might be, but I don't know of any. Usually, those are run by nations. They build these underground silos where they store them, and they take care of it themselves for national security reasons.
Fair enough.
Now, can the Cowboys Stadium safely store all of our nuclear waste?
Safely? No, you need to add some stuff to it, but it would fit easily.
I think he's making a joke about the Cowboys.
I know.
I would make a joke about the Eagles, but that stadium's so toxic, I don't think he would see a difference.
It might enrich the uranium.
Good one.
And that's the best part of this play. When you finally sell out, if you do make money, you can say that you got enriched. And isn't that just fun?
Sold. I'm in.
You could say that your money went nuclear, you got enriched. Like, there's just the puns, they're there for you. And if it doesn't go well, then you can just say that your portfolio melted down, and that's hilarious too. And isn't that why we trade for the memes?
What's the play?
For me, it's buying shares in the uranium miners, like Energy Fuels. You are pretty much all the ones that I've mentioned so far: Global Atomic, Energy Fuels, Denison Mine, UR Energy. If you want to keep your life easy, just buy shares in the ETF URNM. That's the Sprott that's the Sprott Uranium Miners ETF. They have a pretty good portfolio. Sprout is a very good company. You might be familiar with them. They do a lot of plays in like gold, silver, things like that. They're in charge of that ETF and they manage it pretty well. I play individual companies myself because I know what I like, but we keep it simple and just do that.
So, Rad, are you more afraid of like a nuclear meltdown happening or Kramer saying uranium's a buy tomorrow morning? Which one do you think would hurt it worse?
Oh, now you're going to make me unpopular. I actually don't hate Jim Cramer. My dude is asked to like come up with good stocks, like 15 good stocks every single day. If any of us tried that, we'd have terrible picks. You just can't make entertainment out of stocks. I feel bad for Kramer, but now I'm going to be unpopular and everyone's going to be like, well, I'm selling all my positions. Screw this guy. So there you did. You ruined it.
That opinion is unpopular.
Rad, is your nuclear portfolio named Demon Core?
No. And in case anyone's asking, yes, I am actually a reptile. No, I was not born as one. It is because of this uranium investment. It has completely modified me. So yeah, there's that.
Oh man, your uranium inside and out. It's great.
I am part Godzilla, but I won't destroy cities. So just a heads up.
Well, Mr. Godzilla, what did you trade before uranium? Or has it always been this?
I mean, before I played along with the rest of you, stupid stuff that didn't make sense, and some of it went up and some of it went down. But within the last couple of years, I've gotten much more focused on commodities. Someone who I respect very much, a man by the name of Rick Rule. If you're familiar with him, you'll either love him or hate him. Is someone who really got me into the uranium trade and the commodity trade, and honestly has made me, I feel, a much better trader. His trading philosophies, like, you can hate the dude, it's fine, but he has some absolutely amazing trading philosophies. Just the way he views the market, the way he talks about the market. I always love his grocery store analogy that he uses. Has really gotten me much more focused on commodity plays. The specific reason I like commodities and miners is because it's like biotech penny stocks, especially for the explorers, where you can make like 100x returns on these stupid little companies. That it's like, Greg is looking for gold in Canada. Greg found gold. Greg's company is now worth $1 billion. Good for you.
That's awesome. What's the grocery store rule?
Oh God. So he always says you should treat stocks like you would going shopping for groceries. So he always does the analogy of, if you take a regular household of a husband and a wife living together, the husband buys the stocks, the wife buys the groceries. The husband goes to the broker and wants to buy a stock. The broker says it's $1 a share. The husband says, all right, I'll take 10 shares. He goes home. He's happy, right? The wife goes, she wants to buy tuna. It's $1 a can of tuna. She buys 10 cans. She goes home. She's happy, right? He comes back in the next day. The guy says, how's the stock? The broker says it's $2. It's doubled. The guy says, awesome, give me 20 shares. He buys even more, right? The wife goes grocery shopping and she says, how much is tuna? They say $2. She says, screw you. Why is tuna so expensive? I'm buying less of it now, right? That's her decision. They come back the next day. The guy says, how much is my stock? And they say 50 cents. It's died. And the guy says, this sucks. Sell it all. I've lost so much money. The wife goes in, tuna's 50 cents. She says, I want all the tuna. I'm buying more tuna than I've ever bought before. And his thing is always, you should be playing stocks like the wife. You want to buy it when it's 50 cents. If nothing has fundamentally changed and you like it at $1, you should love it at 50 cents. If nothing fundamentally has changed and it's $2, that's when you should be hesitant. You don't want to see it go up if you're positioning. Going down is the best moment for you. He always says, money's made in bear markets. It's realized in bull markets. You get happy at the bull market because that's when you're selling, but it's the bear market when you got in cheap. So that's like the super anecdotal thing that I like from him.
Yeah, you got to buy in the bear.
That's an awesome perspective. So then when you're talking about fundamentals and watching for those, do you ever go so far when you're doing your own research to, since these are small companies, like you said, that can 100x, are you reaching out to like management in these companies and talking to them one-on-one?
They won't talk to me. I'm a baby. They don't care about me. But no, I do. There are YouTube channels where they run their interviews, where I know like Crux Investors is one I like a lot. A lot of these CEOs will come on and talk on there. Another one is Resource Talks. The CEOs will generally come by and talk. I put a lot of stake into the CEO, a lot of stake, because that's the guy who's running the company. I'm listening for people who, if I'm going into a company that's mining something, you better be teaching me something that I didn't know about that sector. You better be open about that. I don't want to hear you telling me how everything's perfect. Mines fail miserably for what can seem like no reason. So I better hear like some terrible stuff, but I put a lot of stock into like hearing the CEOs. But as far as the companies themselves, I've just been watching them so long. I can tell when they're at a good price. When Energy Fuels was at like 540 a month or two ago, I bought more because I was like, it's not supposed to be there. And sure enough, it went back up because it wasn't supposed to be there. It's just a thing you get a feel for.
What about BHP?
BHP does a bunch of different things. So they will pull some uranium. They pull a decent amount, but to them, it's not what they're looking for. They'll be digging for gold and uranium will start coming out with the gold and they'll just sell it on the market. They're not doing long contracts. It's not something that they're seeking, right? It just happens to be there and they're permitted to handle and sell the material. But it's not something that BHP is like, we want to find uranium. I think their Olympic Dam project has a pretty good amount of it. But again, it's not like their desired resource.
You may have touched on this earlier. I don't know. I tuned in late, but some of these companies we know they are choosing not to mine because this. It makes no sense because of their price point. But how are they staying afloat? What are they doing in the meantime until they get those mines going again? When they're just kind of sitting there waiting for the price to hit and sign that contract? Like, what's that day-to-day operation for them in the meantime?
A lot of them, I mean, it depends on the company. UR Energy made it through because they signed very nice 10-year contracts that didn't come to an end until about a year or two ago, and they saved that cash appropriately. Many of them cut back on staff. They said the mine's not running, they've gotten rid of people, and now they're starting to find the issue of it's hard to find those people who know how to do that again to restart. Ones like Energy Fuels had to do a lot of dilution, and it sucks, and it's miserable, right? But it's how they kept themselves afloat. And I know everyone hates that word, dilution, right? Oh no, they're making my stock worth less. But if it's that or insolvency, sometimes it's what a company has to do when they're in a terrible bear market.
So are all these mining companies in the meantime almost becoming like survey companies? Are they still out actively looking, or are they just kind of sitting there in the office like, all right, cool, another day. Yep, no new contract price not there, or
They still wait and see if there are contracts out on the market. I think Energy Fuels and UR Energy in particular have a few contracts now that they just signed on to with utilities. Not for their full supply, but they're both planning to restart. I think sometime middle of next year, they're both going to be restarting some production because they've got some contracting going. But yeah, a lot of it for them is care and maintenance. The mines, when I say shut down, that's not the proper way to put it. The mines are on what they call care and maintenance. They still run solution through. They still pull some uranium out. They keep everything kind of moving at the lowest level they can so that they can get these mines restarted and going. Keep in mind that takes about 6 to 18 months to get these mines re-going once they have contracts. So it's still a long process. But yeah, for a lot of them, that's where their time is spent, is seeing what bids are out there, what contracts are available, and then also running very low level operations, saving some of that supply to the side so that they can kind of sell that off early on as they're getting restarted.
So right now, where do you see the actual value, like the actual price point of uranium?
At least 65 to 70. Honestly, people will say different things, and who knows. I would say I wouldn't be shocked if it pushed into the 90s. These things always overshoot. Oil did it. Oil only needed to hit 60. It went to 100, right? So there's always an overshoot. When I post my DD, you'll see there's a chart in 28 when it did that big push. It went from like $20 to $150 by the end of it. And by the way, just know when it hits at like 150, it goes right back down real quick too. This is very much a sector that will overshoot and then correct.
Well, I mean, when I'll have to go look, but did it die because of Fukushima, or did it die before that?
No, it died because this $200 uranium is too high. It didn't need to be there. Companies didn't need to sign it that high. So here's what happens when a uranium bull market hits. This is kind of like the oversimplification of it. a couple of utilities they have these conferences in the fall where they all kind of talk about their supply, because again, it's not super open knowledge for national security reasons. I can't Google how many years of uranium is sitting in blah, blah, blah power plant. So they meet up in the fall and they kind of have these big conferences where everyone talks, they go over what they have, they go over with like the miners about whether or not they want contracts. But what winds up happening is 2 or 3 of the big boys will be like, hey, we want to secure contracts from several companies. And then everyone else piles in and starts going, we need to get contracts, we need to get contracts, we need to get contracts, because they know there's not a lot of companies in existence that can actually deliver into contracts. So the price kind of does this big shoot up because these companies, there's this very like stern rule of you don't want to be the first company to sign a contract, but you better not be the last one. And that's really what happens to that market when it starts going.
And so then because the contracts are like 5 to 10 years, it gets saturated really fast, and then no one wants any of it.
Well, they're 5 to 10 years, but what happens is the contracts start going like really, really high, really, really high, and these companies are paying prices that are ridiculous, and the companies are finally like, hey, we've secured our supply, we're not desperate anymore. Because again, they're like people have said in here, it's not a rare material, and sometimes these companies, they'll pay a very high price to get it a year or 2 from now, but maybe they're going to go to a Denison mine who says they won't be ready until 2025, and they'll say, hey, Denison, we're going to get it from you for a lower price, but we're going to start getting it from you in 2025 onward. They'll do things like that where they're taking on a risk of this guy says they'll have a mine down the line, but they'll give it to us cheaper if we're willing to take that risk. And that's what kind of normalizes the price.
So a spike up could happen because a new mine, for example, by Denison fails to deliver, right? Like that would cause a spike.
Oh, spikes do happen. In 2008, a spike happened because one of Cameco's mines flooded, and that caused a massive spike.
Got it.
These spikes do happen. Again, when I post the DD, you'll see the chart. They have these massive spikes. It's a very like boring. Oh dear God, where did this come from? Boring. But that oh dear God, where did this come from? You have to understand that's a period where, if I'm invested in energy fuels, you might be like, oh, that only lasted a couple months. Yeah, but they've signed that contract for 10 years at that price. So they've got a decade of income secured now, not just a month's worth.
How long did Japan's decision in 2011 impact the price? That must have flooded the market, right? Because all of those plants stopping their contracts or dumping their contracts to other plants must have.
Yeah, I'll have to look. Hang on, let me do. I've got the chart in front of me because I'm going to post this anyway. Do. In 2011, it went from like $80 and then took a sharp decline to like 40, and by like the middle of 2013, it was down to like $30, and then it went all the way down to like $20. It just kept dropping and dropping and dropping.
Those contracts, probably from all those contracts needing to be offloaded.
Yeah, because they were selling that supply. But again, that was not the mine selling at those prices. That was now a lot of the banks
Japan.
came in and started buying it up. That was another thing that happened. A lot of banks like Bank of America and those came in buying up the cheap pounds, saying, hey, we can sell these off later to utilities. And we can sell them on like a monthly basis because we don't care. We don't have operational costs for a mine.
Interesting.
Hey, what stocks are you miners are you invested in?
No, that's fine. So I'm currently positioned. I don't care. You know my stocks. I don't care. I'm not here to hide anything. Energy Fuels, UUUU, Canadian Ticket ERF, I think. Denison Mines, DNN, Canadian Ticket DML, Cameco CCJ, Canadian Ticket COO, I think. I might get some of these Canadian ones wrong because I don't play much on the TSX. And then UR Energy, ticker URG, are the ones I'm playing. I don't play OTC stocks. If I did, I would happily be in like a Global Atomic, who I can't give you their OTC off the top of my head. I'd be in like a Deep Yellow, who I can't give you the ticker off the top of my head. I'd probably be in some like other really aggressive ones like a Can Alaska, which is an Explorer. But these are all companies that I would strongly suggest to you. Don't just be like, Rad said energy fuels, it must be the best company. No, Rad likes energy fuels for like a lot of reasons. and it might not match your portfolio, right? So just because I happen to like a company doesn't mean it's necessarily the best company. And don't just like blindly follow me. I would strongly suggest you look into these because like when I talked about Denison, that huge risk of like they're trying to do something that's never been done before, you wouldn't know that from me just listing off my portfolio, right? So you do need to dig into
Right.
some of these boys. These things are in different places. Several ones that I mentioned don't even have a mine. They have a patch of ground and they're planning on building it in this inflationary environment with these supply chain issues. And they'll tell you they'll
Oh,
have it up
really?
in 2 years. Maybe they won't. Some of them don't even have permits yet, right? So you got to look into these.
Yeah.
I think that's when we've asked all the. Oh wait, What Geek is here. I'm so sorry, What Geek. How long have you been sitting there?
I mean, it's been like 2.5 hours.
Oh, I didn't see your name on the list. I'm sorry.
No, you're good. I just showed up. I forgot about you guys. To be honest with you, I went and picked up groceries, and now I'm cooking a fucking pork loin.
Very nice. Hope it's not a radioactive pork loin.
There's lots of uranium in it.
So I'm
Oh,
not going to be
no.
able to stay around too much longer. But like I said, I'll post that DD at the end of this. But if there's
Yeah,
any
that'll be rad.
pressing questions, sorry that this wasn't much of a cage match. I guess I'll
Yeah,
end.
that's all good.
Opinion. I'd have knocked you out. I'd knocked those glasses right off your face if you'd tried me. Big right hook
Oh,
coming
no.
from me.
Not both my glasses.
All I know is I showed up and heard Canadian Tickle, and I was happy.
It was a really good talk. I mean, Reptile just absolutely carried the thing beautifully. He knows his stuff inside and out, and I think this is definitely going to get a big shout out on the daily talk. Not tomorrow because tomorrow is a holiday, but on Friday. So yeah, I mean, like after doing this, I'm really excited to do more of these. I know I personally learned
Great
a lot.
job.
All
Thanks.
props
I've
to
spent
Reptile.
way too many hours in this.
Well, hopefully it's paid
Understood.
off.
It's what you got to do, right? I don't want to send my money somewhere where someone just said, "Trust me, bro." Even though I guess technically this talk is me saying, "Trust me, bro."
That's like half my DDs. What do you mean?
Man, I've been looking forward to a chat about uranium for so long, and this exceeded my expectations. So I really appreciate your DD and your everyone's questions and stuff. It's really good.
I feel like I missed so much.
Likewise.
Recordings on YouTube. We'll let Dylan maybe take the last question. He's been waiting for a bit. Dylan L10, if you're there.
Go, Dylan.
Yes. Hello, can you guys hear me?
What's up?
Yeah.
Hey, how you guys doing? Big fans. I haven't been paying too much attention. I know you guys have been talking about stocks. I do have a cryptocurrency question, if that's okay.
No, Dylan. No,
It is not okay. It is not okay. But come back tomorrow morning and maybe on the daily talk. But yeah, Reptile, this has been great. Thanks so much for spending 2 hours of your life talking to us goofballs about uranium. What should we do next? What topic do you guys want to hear?
Cryptocurrency.
We'll get Dylan to be our speaker for cryptocurrency. Nintendo, all right, that's a good one. Reptile, how about you? Since
I won't do it next because I'm gonna need a long break after this, but I'll give you all a copper one at some point too.
No, that's awesome. I was gonna say actually, since you had you took the initiative to host this one, you should get to choose the next topic. So what's something that you've been curious about that you want to learn more about?
Oh, God, it's got to be semiconductors. If we can get that guy who was on today, who was like, "I've put semiconductors into space."
Okay, yeah, definitely semiconductors. I agree with you. That guy was awesome.
Could you do like a poll with like a few topics, maybe?
No, I hosted a talk. This is a dictatorship now. Deal with it.
Oh, there you go. You heard it from your chief leader, Rad Reptile.
Nah, you guys could totally do a poll. I'm not being like that.
Just drops a nuke.
Oh no. Well, hey, I
Selling
mean,
all
that's
my
one way to.
shares. Did you guys actually buy? Gotcha. Buy GME 420. I'm out.
He's shorting so aggressively.
That's what it felt with a certain German warehouse stock.
Oh no, I didn't mean to kill it with the elevator music, but I think we'll wrap it up there. Thank you guys all so much for joining in, and see you all Friday or tomorrow on our Thanksgiving call at noon.
Thanks, Opinion. Thanks, Ryan.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye for now. Cheers.
Bye.
Thank you all.